Hi everyone and welcome back to Stephan podcast brought to you by Bold, the best place to buy, sell or store your Bitcoin over at getbold.io for the American listeners. Now rejoining me on the show today, Gloria Zhao and Fabian Jahr. Welcome back to the show, Gloria and Fabian.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great. So let's just start with where things are going in Bitcoin Core. As I understand, we've got version 28 coming out soon, right?
Yeah, I think we're on RC2, so assuming no hiccups in 1 or 2 weeks, you'll be able to run 28.0 from bitcoincore.org. Well, you could test out the release candidates today if you want to. That would be helpful. But yeah, it's got some pretty exciting new features in it.
Great. And so I guess for listeners who are just trying to get an idea of what's going on with some of these things, maybe they may not all of them will directly run Bitcoin Core themselves. Maybe they're running like a Rust by Blitz or an Umbrel or a Minode or something like that, and that is what's running, Bitcoin Core underlying it. And so maybe if we can explain for listeners a little bit about what are some of the typical changes that come through in Bitcoin Core, and maybe explain a little bit about what are some of the, with some examples, what are some small changes that might come through in a new version of Bitcoin Core, and what are some of the big changes and the big projects that might come through?
Well, I thought Bitcoin Core doesn't do anything at all. I thought it was just completely stuck. That's what I heard.
Yeah, I don't know.
You said there's some exciting features.
Yeah, well, so every day or every week at least, we're pushing kind of bug fixes, really minor code quality updates. That's some of the work. A lot of it is maintenance. Recently, we just upgraded the build system, which is not user-facing at all, but it does make development a lot more efficient and cleaner and all those things, and it removes some of the cruft. We're always adding tests. These are the minor things that make up the majority of the work that's done on Bitcoin Core, and it's very, very important. It helps make sure that we push the security bar higher and higher as the stakes for Bitcoin get higher, as Bitcoins become more valuable. But in terms of features, a lot of them are related to, so AssumeUTXO is a great example where a user might actually be interested in that, where you might be able to use your node immediately without having to wait until the syncing is finished. Package relay and all of the mempool policies that I'm working on, maybe a little bit less user-facing, but it might be what's going on under the hood with your Lightning transactions, for example. And hopefully, if and as we see Lightning start to adopt those things, it makes the fee bumping experience much more smooth. And it also smooths out some of the kind of security guarantees where it's like, it's all safe unless this fee spike happens. That kind of caveat goes away. And so you no longer have to overestimate, et cetera. And hopefully over time, that means that as a Lightning user, it becomes cheaper for you to participate in your Lightning channels and all your payments are easier. And so that I just named two of the features, package relay, trucks. Basically, a lot of my kind of mempool policy proposals are in this release. So truck, sibling eviction, package RBF, along with package relay. And then Fabian, if you want to talk about some of yours.
Yeah, within this release, kind of the reason why I'm here is that AssumeUTXO, that was already mentioned that we have that in the release, and that's something that was kind of stuck in a limbo of being somewhat merged but not available on mainnet previously. And so I was involved in kind of getting that across the finish line. And then also testnet 4 is where I implemented this new testnet. It was a single pull request and then some follow-ups. But these were the two ones that we have in there right now that I was involved in pretty heavily.
Yeah, okay. So maybe one thing to zoom out a little bit, touching on this idea of, there are some changes that are just small and maybe under the hood that people won't notice, and others there are kind of big projects that are landing. And so I think there's probably the the listener who's maybe not following us closely might have two sort of concerns. One is the one you mentioned, which is kind of like, does Bitcoin Core even do anything like the, but I guess that you could also ask the question, should there be these big projects, right? There might be some who are, not quite being an ossifier per se, but they might be sort of saying, no, I just want this kind of stable thing. And then maybe on the other side, there might be some people who are saying, no, I do want things and I want them faster. That they have this perception that, look how quickly other software projects are moving, not necessarily like, altcoins, but just software in general. There's maybe a perception about the pace of change. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts you guys want to add in there about the pace of change.
Sure. I think most of us fall, well, not to speak on behalf of anybody else, but I would say I'm on the more conservative side when it comes to software engineering in general, and maybe even within Bitcoin Core. But that doesn't mean that we should just not do anything, right? And I myself have made lots of proposals. And I think a really good example here is the mempool policy stuff, because it is, I think, an example of something that Satoshi created that was imperfect. Satoshi did a lot of amazing things. I named my dog after Satoshi, but he wrote some imperfect code, sorry. And over the years, we've kind of run up against all the limitations there, and that kind of demands that we make a change or at least refine on the trade-offs that we made so that they are safer. So for example, Satoshi made it so that you could spend unconfirmed outputs like as much as you want, right? So you create a transaction, it hasn't confirmed yet, you can spend the outputs of that transaction immediately. However, he didn't make any kind of limitation. So originally it was infinite. Originally the mempool was infinite. And these are all very, very much not DOS resistant trade-offs to make. And so over the years, we've kind of added limitations. We added, you can only have 25 descendants. You can only have 25 ancestors. But then we found that means you can have an infinite cluster size, and that we run into all kinds of pinning problems, and like the mining code is kind of hampered and slowed down by the fact that there's all this complexity, et cetera, et cetera. And so like part of what Truck does, Truck is a limited topology. It says you can only have one parent and one child. Most use cases are perfectly happy to only have these restrictions. And within the world of one parent, one child topology, we can do it perfectly. And it's like super lightning fast to like assess all these things. We can perfectly calculate with the mining scores, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's one of those projects where, yes, we eventually do need to figure this out, because we started from a place that wasn't, again, I'm not trying to knock on Satoshi. It just wasn't ideal, and it doesn't really work for the use cases that we have today. And it's really not, like, I think people get really scared about touching protocol code, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't touch it. We shouldn't, like, we're not blindly merging things, and we're not blindly like deciding things. That's me advocating for, like, we should get things done. But of course, I totally agree with the people that the security bar is really high, a lot is at stake, and we should be proceeding with a lot of caution.
Yeah, Fabian, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to put it into like a framework or so to really formalize it. But I would say in general, like, of course, we have a lot of maintenance and like smaller improvements. I think anyone who is a software engineer can relate to that and has a hard time imagining any project that is maintained without maintenance. Like, it's just that's the nature of it, basically. And then I think, like, in terms of features or like bigger changes that we add, at least to me, I would say that's always like the bar is we want to overall just always make it safer and easier to use. So anything that like fulfills both, or at least one of them, without like trading one for the other, these are worthwhile changes. And as always with our review bar that we're setting, several people have to agree that this is actually a good idea, and like this doesn't trade off one for the other or so. And so then when enough people think that it's worthwhile, then we get behind it and try to implement it and get it included.
So I want to focus in on the comment around enough people think it's worthwhile, and I think you're right, but it might be useful just to explain for people because, as Gloria pointed out, as it's well acknowledged, Bitcoin Core, back then it was not even on Bitcoin, it was not even called Bitcoin Core, but it wasn't perfect from day one. There were changes and things that were necessary over time, and we could even say that as the system grows over time, maybe I'm kind of paraphrasing and putting it loosely, but the system is going to hit a certain level of load that you sort of need more optimization or more things to kind of help you deal with a certain level of transaction that's happening on Bitcoin. And that's why maybe you need this kind of mempool, this more advanced way of dealing with the mempool and more advanced way of dealing with the ancestry of the transactions and so on. And even from an AssumeUTXO point of view, right? Like as the blockchain grows, we need ways for people to be able to quickly onboard and start and run their own Bitcoin node and these kinds of things. But it necessitates, harder engineering trade-off conversations because you can't, there's no free lunch. There's always a trade-off with something. So how do you what are the main ways people decide, okay, this is a worthwhile project or this is not a worthwhile project?
I think I'll echo what Fabian said, that there is no formalized formula or equation or checklist that is out there for you to, go down the boxes and make it happen. And I think it's different for each project. I think there's again, you said a trade-off between what's the risk and what's the potential benefit. Certain soft forks that can cause people to fall off the chain, and if it doesn't give us anything, then yeah, that's maybe not something that we want to go for. Whereas, I don't know, I think a lot of these mempool things are pretty no-brainer, where they're really useful and not very risky. Well, they are risky, but less so than a soft fork. But I think, yeah, a lot of people. So I don't have a good answer for you. We can maybe talk about what the process looks like for trying to get buy-in from the right people, because I have seen, I think, a lot of people championing certain projects that fall into these pitfalls of seeking buy-in from the wrong people. Like they're looking for Twitter likes instead of code review, for example. And there's kind of this, at different points in the project, you'll want buy-in from different people, right? So conceptual feedback should be first, right? Is this a good idea? Like, have you talked to the potential users? Who are the potential users? And then later, when you move on, eventually you have to get to approach and code review, because everybody could think it's a good idea, but if literally nobody has looked at the code and nobody on Twitter is looking at your code, then this is hit a dead end. And then as the code matures, then you have to go back to the people who might use it and you ask them to test out your pull request, and you kind of have this cycle of feedback that hopefully reinforces itself and gains momentum until you kind of have a lot of eyes on what it is that you're working on, and eventually it makes it in. I think I'll put that out there.
Sure. So when it comes to different projects being championed, sometimes it can take a long time for them to land. As I recall, AssumeUTXO, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that was James O'Byrne, right? James O'Byrne in maybe 2019, something like that. It was like this idea was, here we are, September 2024. That's 5 years ago. So maybe if you guys could help explain why it is that some projects, especially for the listeners who aren't as, involved in the world of software development, why does it seem like, 5 years for a project to land? Why is that?
Yeah, I think that's for me. So 2019 is correct. I remember that very well because that's when I basically got started contributing, and I also met James O'Byrne pretty early around that time, and I was working on this CoinStats index. Stephan, we
did an episode about that probably 4 or 5 years ago, but yeah.
Exactly. And so there were quite a bit of overlap in terms of the code we touched to AssumeUTXO, and that's why I got interested in it very early, and that's why I also already care about this project basically since then. And so James was working on this and was working on some other things as well, and like kind of I think was doing pretty much all the right things, but maybe not all of them, or maybe it was a bit too early, or maybe people didn't care enough about it. So it's kind of hard for me why it didn't get that much buy-in from people. But it was just kind of like dragging along, and people in generally had an idea that it was, or said it was a good idea, but maybe there were just at the moment other things that they found were more important or so. So it took quite a long time, and I think over time James also got a bit annoyed by the lack of progress. I think that's I can say that because I think he's also voiced that on Twitter and so on. So he still like provided code, but wasn't really that interested in going down rabbit holes and doing bike shitting anymore. And so kind of the compromise, I guess we can call it, was that over a year ago, basically the last pull request that implemented the feature fully was merged, but it was not enabled on mainnet. It was just enabled on Signet and on Rectest, of course, but also on testnet. And so people could basically test it out, but not really use it. I mean, this is really a feature for syncing the node, making getting started with mainnet easier. So it was kind of a cop-out, I would say. So the idea was that, okay, we merged the code now, like otherwise you have other problems like the pull request rots over time, like you have to keep rebasing it, especially when it's a big thing that touches a lot parts of the code base, because other things change all the time as well. And so the code was in there, and like kind of I think, like, I'm not sure if it was ever said explicitly, but kind of my understanding, and I think from everyone the understanding was that we let it lay there with Signet and testnet for one release, and then in the next release we'll enable it for mainnet. And at this time, then James was kind of like, okay, I need a break. So James was not really after getting that done and like getting few people feel comfortable with the feature, I guess. And so there were in particular one improvement was opened at the time, and one bug that was kind of deemed important were opened, but like there was not really any work on it getting done. Like they were kind of laying there but not getting merged. And I kind of when the next release came around 6 months ago, I joined the meeting and kind of realized that we hadn't merged these mainnet parameters for AssumeUTXO yet. And so I kind of like opened the pull request, but I actually had missed that Shores had already had a pull request for it. But I was really surprised that I kind of like, I hadn't seen these other pull requests. I kind of lost track of it myself. And so I guess kind of everyone had lost track of like what there was still was needed to do for AssumeUTXO. And so everyone was just busy working on something else, I guess, and as their primary target of getting stuff done.
Right,
So the result was that in the last release, there was no AssumeUTXO and mainnet parameters. And so I kind of set that as one of my goals for the work for the next 6 months to get it ready. And my go-to tool for that was I just opened a tracking issue. That is just an issue where you kind of lay out what are the things that need to be done, and just kind of give people kind of a point to see what the work what is being worked on at the time for a specific feature, and where they can go to contribute. And so that grew quite a bit. So aside from all of the stuff that was there before, that was known, that was interesting to be addressed, there was a lot of additional test coverage that was added over the last 6 months. These issues that I mentioned were merged, but also a few other issues were discovered and also merged. So I think overall, like by the time this release came around, and we merged the mainnet parameters finally for this release, I think there was like 17, 18 pull requests that were tracked in this tracking issue. So really a lot of work has been done on this AssumeUTXO project. And so I think that's also kind of symptomatic of like people kind of lost track of it and were not really paying attention to it and not looking for issues. And that, on the other hand, kind of gave many people the feeling of that they are not 100% comfortable with this feature being available on mainnet. And so both the transparency and like seeing that actually there's a lot of more work gone into it then made people comfortable and say, okay, it's fine to enable it on mainnet. So that's kind of the journey from AssumeUTXO, I guess, also right up to this release and it being included in this release.
Great. And look, I'm sure long-time listeners are aware, they've probably heard it mentioned a few times, but if you could just give the simple kind of 30-second explanation or 1-minute explanation, what is AssumeUTXO, just to make sure everyone can follow along.
Yeah. So when you sync the chain, when you start your node for the first time, you're synchronizing the whole chain. You're loading all of the historical blocks, and only when you're done with that, you can use the node as a full node. And what you're building up over time is the UTXO set, which tracks all of the coins that are unspent. That's unspent transaction output. And so what AssumeUTXO allows you to do is allows you to load a UTXO set that is from much more recent. So in this case now we use the last halving block, and you load that and then you sync from that point. And you assume that this UTXO set is valid. That is additionally the security that you have there is that a hash of this UTXO set is included in the code. That is exactly the thing that we just talked about that needed to be merged for mainnet. And so you sync from that UTXO set to the tip, which is a lot less work to do, and then you can get started with using the node. And then in the background you still do the full sync with all of the rest of the blocks for additional security. And if you need to have them, if you want to have them for the future. But yeah, it allows you get started with using your full node much quicker than it was before.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold Vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 of 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Cold Card hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show. Gotcha. Yeah, so let me just paraphrase that again because that's a lot. Just for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar, the idea is when you want to participate in Bitcoin as a first-class Bitcoin user, you want to run your Bitcoin node. This is a piece of technology that allows you to quickly bootstrap your full node with some certain trust assumptions. And the idea is you're taking, let's say, a snapshot of the UTXO set and you're kind of trusting it from here, but also in the background, your Bitcoin node is going to download the blocks and is able to verify all the way through to prove that that particular hash that you started with was correct. That's kind of the short form, I would say. But what's the implication of this? The implication of this means that with AssumeUTXO, it's now a lot easier for people to actually run their Bitcoin Core node, because now you can be up and running really quickly. Whereas historically, those users might have just used either a custodial platform, right? That's the elephant in the room. They just got their coins on Coinbase or whatever. Or they might be using an Electrum-style wallet that's calling out to a server. Or they may just be using a Bitcoin wallet where you're trusting the creator of that wallet to give you the correct answer. And so in this version, if you're using your own Bitcoin Core with AssumeUTXO, you can be sort of up and running faster. So I guess that's the implication, and it might make it easier if this were to be built into other things. As an example, BtcpayServer. I know you were talking a bit about that, Fabian, or I believe you have been looking at that.
Yeah, BtcpayServer has their own solution for this, where you, I think they call it fast sync, and of course it's fine if you want to trust BtcpayServer and get kind of a solution from them. I think it's a great project, but you always also trust Bitcoin Core in the background anyway, and so wouldn't it be better if you didn't have to trust both of them, but you just have to trust Core, which maybe I'm going on a limb, but I think it has more attention on it and more review. So yeah, and I think it should also be more performant, the feature, doing it with Bitcoin Core. So I think it's an upside, and also for BtcpayServer, the project, they don't have to do this maintenance of this feature anymore in the future. So I think it's a win for everyone.
Yeah. And then if we zoom out, like my intention here is not to sort of point the finger of blame and say, oh, see, why didn't it come in 5 years or whatever? Like, my point is more about kind of broadly, just so people understand, this is like an open source system. There's no top-down controller saying, okay, today, Gloria, you're working on this, and today, Fabian, you're working on that, and we need to get this done. It's not like a software company where there's, development releases and manage, this kind of thing. So it sort of relies a bit more on this kind of decentralized nature of contributors, and I guess that's where one element of it is, and maybe another element is around the funding, right? That having developer funding and things like that has evolved a lot since 2019, and so maybe that's also part of it. I'm curious if you guys have any other thoughts on that, just kind of more broadly and not just kind of AssumeUTXO specific.
The funding thing, I have seen some criticisms where people say, like, oh, developers who are funded by a specific company or thing will work on things that have of interest to that company. I of course can't speak for all of them, but I would say that there's a yes, like my answer to that is yes and no, where no as in the vast majority of the places out there like Chaincode and Blockstream and Spiral and Brink, of course, I think operate on a no strings attached model where it's like, we just want to see you doing work, and like, we're not going to tell you you have to work on XYZ project. And I think that's really important, and we have to maintain that and protect that. But on the other hand, I think there is a lot of maybe internalized and somewhat external pressure on developers where when they apply for grants, they want to come up with this like sexy project proposal. And of course, like we said, like the answer might be no, it might not be a good idea. It might take a really long time. And the most impactful thing that you might be doing might be just writing tests and doing code review and helping with maintenance. And that is, I think, people think that that looks less attractive on a grant application. And I think that's somewhat on the people giving the grants as well as the people applying for grants for like having this conception. And that is something that we want to fight, because it isn't helpful for everybody to be getting grants to like work on their own proposal. And they're just kind of, if you imagine this huge tug of war in this decentralized network, everybody's tugging in their own direction, and then obviously you don't go anywhere. It's much more important that we focus on what matters and work together to do that. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I've seen a lot of that kind of discussion. But in general, yeah, the decentralized decision-making thing is really hard for people to grok, because a lot of people imagine that I think a lot of people have this mindset of like there's this committee, like you're going on Shark Tank, and there's a panel of judges, like the maintainers are a panel of judges, and you like present your work that you worked really hard on, and then they say like, I'm in, I'm out. Yeah. But that's not at all how it is. Usually it's you worked really hard on this project and there's no judges, there's no one to present to, nobody's reviewing your work because there are a million other ideas. And like today, there's probably 300 something pull requests open on Bitcoin Core. And it's not like it was a yes or a no. I think people feel more rejected because nobody said anything, or the answer is unclear. And that really, really sucks. But that's the nature of working on open source and a decentralized project.
One other area I'd love for you guys to touch on, because again, elephant in the room, Bitcoin Core is the most popular implementation of Bitcoin. It's not even close, right? But there are other implementations, right? There's BTCD, Libitcoin, maybe a few others, Bitcoin Knots, right? There's a few others out there. How does the existence of other competing implementations, apply here? Like, let's say there's a big project, but would those big projects not really happen in other implementations, or maybe they just have other focus, right? They might have, as an example, BTCD, as I understand, was kind of because some of the guys who wanted to code with Go and things like this. So maybe they have different focus, or they have a different focus. So I'm curious, how does that play into it? The fact that there's other implementations out there.
It makes backward compatibility a big question. As you know, every BIP will have a backward compatibility section, and compatibility with other nodes, particularly in peer-to-peer protocol stuff. Like WTXID relay, for example, is something that BTCD doesn't implement. And I'm not trying to criticize or anything, but that means that, that's not granted. You can't just be like, oh, assuming all nodes do this, then transactions will propagate. Because I guess that's not really, you can't rely on that. It would mean that like all the BTCD nodes users, their transactions wouldn't propagate and you'd be breaking their use case if you change protocol to rely on that. And I wouldn't say that maybe it makes things a little more complicated, but it's good in the long run that there are multiple implementations. I think ideally we would share a kernel. Like we would, like, not to name yet another Bitcoin Core project, but there are a lot of consensus issues with multiple implementations, and we've seen historically, just even in the past 2 years, we've seen a few bugs happen there, and I think also security issues. I'm not going to I'm not trying to criticize, but I truly do think that Bitcoin Core has a much higher bar for security than probably any other project that I've ever seen software wise, and I think sometimes you aren't always able to meet the bar because there's a different amount of maintainers and reviewers that are looking at the code there.
And I guess just to explain that aspect you were saying about consensus, obviously in Bitcoin, it's very important that we stay on the same chain, right? Or that you at least are on the chain that you want to be on, if you want to split off, let's say. But that can be really important, because then if there's different implementations and then they're actually falling out of consensus with each other, that's going to be a big problem if we're trying to transact with each other and we're on different chains, right?
Yeah, especially unintentionally when we do want to be on the same chain.
Right.
We should try to. Yeah. But it would be great if a lot of the non-core like node running things were different. Like the Bitcoin Core wallet is very much attached to the Bitcoin Core node, and like we even have a GUI, famously. But like a lot of the, I'd say, auxiliary kind of features and components of Core don't need to be common across every single node, and it would be actually really great if there were competitors per se trying to make better versions of those features, provided that the internal consensus engine is the same and meets the same bar for security, of course. And that's really, really important. That's more important than any of the other things that I listed.
I see, yeah. So I guess let's say, looking at big projects and things, what are some of the concerns, what are some of the considerations that come up when somebody wants to engage in one of these, let's say, big projects that's not kind of it's not something that you can just kind of go by and just do this one pull request and it's in and that's it. It's now more like you're dealing with maybe different areas of the code. You're having to kind of do things in stages. Maybe that would be useful to explain what is that process, what does it require, what does it sort of take to kind of get it over the line in a big project?
Yeah, build iteratively is, I think, a really big point here, where you're not going to open a pull request with 100,000 lines of code changed and then just like you're like, all right, cool. Like when is this going to get in? I do think that breaking it up into small chunks is really, really important. That's kind of why like all of the anti-pinning and better RBF ideas, like those were the titles of my mailing list posts, and they've turned into like 5 or 6 different proposals. One's truck, one's sibling eviction, one's package RBF, one's 1P1C, like all these things. Like in this release, we get huge gains. And then in the next release, hopefully we get another huge gain. And then in each release, we get more and more features. That's, I think, very important. I'll pass it to Fabian for the next pro tip.
Yeah, I think that kind of going along the same lines. I think involving people early. That's something that I learned in another project that I kind of took over the ASMap stuff. So ASMap is another thing where the feature in this case was merged and was also available on mainnet. So I think many people would have said like there's not really anything else to do. But the problem is that you always need to have a map that you actually use for this feature. Otherwise it doesn't work. And you kind of want to have a map that is up to date and also that is ideally of the highest quality possible. And so into that particular problem, there was just not a lot of thought that had gone into that. And the feature originally was implemented by Gleb, and Peter was also heavily involved. And so this was another thing that was implemented, but like kind of it wasn't really widely used as far as we know. And part of that was that there were just not these maps available and you needed to find the map somewhere. But since you didn't find it, you had to run some tool that was in some other repository that was either just a pull request or it was some Rust stuff. And so
sorry, Fabian, just before we go further, could you just explain kind of in simple terms what's the ASMap project and then and then go into it.
So as you run your Bitcoin Core node, you connect to peers, and ideally you want these peers to be as diverse as possible, right? Because if they all come, like if they are all, let's say, within your house, if your house goes down, then you yourself go down. But if they were all in the same data center, let's say, and that data center goes down, you don't have any peers anymore, right? Or if somebody just hacks that data center, then you're eclipsed and anything can happen to your node. So ideally you would want maybe one of them to be your neighbor, but then somebody in El Salvador and somebody in the US and somebody in Australia or whatever, to make it geographically interesting, let's say.
Right. And I guess the reason for that is, not for kind of lefty woke DEI reasons, it's for genuine security reasons, right? It's like you want to make sure that you're not being eclipsed, you're not being fed wrong data and incorrectly assume you're on the right chain and actually you're on some false chain and and somebody's stealing from you, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the something that is quite apparent, like that many people know, but maybe some also don't, is that there's quite a lot of nodes being hosted in these cloud service providers. So AWS, Hetzner, they are responsible for hosting large parts of the network. And so it wouldn't be ideal if you're just connected to a lot of AWS nodes, or just like, I think it would be feasible that just by chance you would be connected to just AWS, Hetzner and Google Cloud. I mean, it's still unlikely, but at least it's in the realm of possibility. And so you want to have some diversity. And so you ideally just want to have one node at AWS, one peer at AWS and one at Hetzner, Metzner, and then maybe somebody who lives in the woods in I don't know, Connecticut or whatever. So that's that would be ideal, right? Like that's a diverse set of peers, and to get this diversity, you need to have this knowledge, right? You need to know if this is somebody who is hosted in a data center at AWS, or if it's somebody who is hosted somewhere that is completely remote and it's just a small ISP in I don't know, Uruguay or whatever. And so in order to get this diversity, you need to have knowledge, and this knowledge is this map. So this map basically shows you which IPs are controlled by which autonomous systems. That's a very technical, it's an entity that controls IP networks, basically. So,
Great.
and with this knowledge, because it constantly changes, this is basically just a map of the internet. Like all of the internet traffic is routed also with this information. So this is constantly changing, but also not changing that much, that like that substantially, that it's not fine to have this map and like run it for several months or even years. But still, you, as we said, we want to have the highest quality possible. You don't want to have somebody to feed you a malicious map, fresher is also better. Right.
Yeah. So when it comes to these larger projects, so as we mentioned, there's a few of these that are kind of landing in this next release, version 28. So AssumeUTXO, the ASMap you mentioned, and Gloria, some of your mempool projects are landing in this as well. Is there any other ones that we haven't covered yet?
Yes, testnet 4. I think I credit Fabian for making that happen, because I think in terms of making it happen, I would say there was not that much code to be written. I think Fabian's really great at coming in and being like, this is missing a champion, and going and getting the buy-in and making sure that the questions are answered, and coming to the IRC meeting and being like, we've already answered these questions. What's next to get this merged? That makes him sound very demanding, but that is often what's missing. That's the missing ingredient. I'm very happy testnet 4 is done.
Yeah, I think that's also another interesting journey. I mean, I basically just saw Jameson Lobb's mailing list posts about that we needed to reset testnet, and I thought, I've never done a new network. I've never mined a Genesis block. How about I just try that out? And yeah, I did that, and it really wasn't initially. I mean, there was still needed quite a lot of fixes, but it was initially just, I don't know, half a day or so. We just put it out there and said okay, this is another point where we can discuss this kind of and so a lot of discussion came in, and that was the biggest piece of the work then, I think. Not so much writing the code and addressing the issues, but then kind of keeping the bike shedding at bay, and kind of always trying to get people to converge on something, on an idea, because in general people agreed, okay, we should just reset it, and there was just really really the minor details were being discussed, but in general, I think my underlying belief was always that there's a lot of people that think this is a good idea, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be in the next release, and so I kind of that's how I kind of then kind of used my touch points on the IRC meetings and so on to say okay, we have another couple of weeks. I will come in again and remind people that this is still going, and just to ask if people still have thoughts on it, and if there's still anything missing. I mean, initially, for example, I didn't even write the BIP, and then somebody requested a BIP, so I provided a BIP for it, and so all of this was helpful, but overall it wasn't that much work to be done. It's just really needed to kind of get towards the finish line, and I just really tried to get it into release because there was just no reason not to do it.
Other than trying to deal with comments, and I think people shy away from that sometimes. I think another, sorry, I'm going to keep giving Fabian compliments. I think he's really good at, so every big project needs lots of people working on it. There's no big project that you're going to get done as one person. You at least need 3, someone to write the code, someone to review it, someone to merge it. But really, usually it takes a village, right? And I think one thing that I really appreciated about the ASMap project was I remember was how easy it was to help generate the ASMap. Like Fabian created this tool, Cartograph, I think,
Yeah.
where it was just like you run these two commands, we all do it at the same time, 2 p.m. UTC on this day, and like we'll help create this this hash. And so you didn't need to know anything about ASMap to run that. But if you were excited about the idea of creating this ASMap and like avoiding Eclipse attacks and whatnot, you could be one of the, 6 to 8 people who like did this together. And like you didn't need to learn everything about ISPs and autonomous systems and all those things. And like I think that I saw that in Package Relay as well, where there are people who really like Package Relay, but they have spent 0 time looking at the transaction relay code. And everybody, I found like nobody wants to review mempool code. And so it was like, okay, I'm going to split this project into like 2 tracks. There's a mempool track and the peer-to-peer track. And then there's like big PRs and there's like small PRs where I'm like, oh, move these things around, add some tests. Like anybody can review that PR. And then I would like announce in the IRC meeting, like, hey, I have this really easy PR if you like Package Relay, but you haven't, spent the time reading the pages and pages and pages of background, and you aren't a mempool expert, you can review this code. And those tended to be really popular. And I found like, oh, actually I have more friends, like Package Relay has more friends than I actually realized. And most people are intimidated by the amount of complex information that there is. And so you need people at every level. Like you need the like introductory, anybody can run this. And you also need the like more meaty, like, hey, here's like all the background, please understand all of this before you try to review this code. And so, yeah, like you have people in both groups. So there's another tip for people.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right.
to add to that,
Go on.
I think that I also with ASMap I also put out lots of writings that were going into a lot of detail about all of the learnings that I had and all of the thought I put into it. But yeah, that was not getting as much traction as I had hoped. And so, but yeah, putting the tool out there and then always using the chance to kind of engage people with it and like let them run it and see how it works. I think that's a much easier way to get people involved. So for example, I gave a workshop at TabConf last year. That was a bit too early. It didn't fully work at the time yet. But then, yeah, this year when I was sitting with Gloria and some other Brinkies, we used that as a session to run it as a demo, and there it worked well, and yeah, was good to demo it. So that's also like use the chances when you are with people to show it to them and give them opportunity to participate. I think that really helps to engage people.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just wanted one very quickly. I had the same experience where I think one thing is because a lot of people haven't looked at the code that you might be touching in a really long time, you might actually just have to create lots of educational material about the code itself, like as it is today, as well as your own proposal. And I remember I've written just so much stuff, and I like meticulously made it really easy to follow and all these like things. And I was like, why is nobody reading this? Because people just don't have enough time. But it is still important because some people will read it. Like Greg, who I work with very closely now, he went through all of it, and now he's an extremely key person in like making all of this happen. And it wouldn't be we wouldn't be getting all this done without Greg. So it's very important to have that person, but you're not going to have 10 of those. You're probably going to have 10 people who are willing to run the 2 commands that you post, though.
This show brought to you by mempool.space, the world's leading Bitcoin visualizer. And now they've got an accelerator program. So if you have a transaction that you sent at a fee that was too low to get confirmed, now you can fix this with the mempool accelerator. The way it works, you can go and search your transaction, scroll down, click accelerator, and you don't need an account. You can pay with Lightning, and then it'll show you it's now in the process of being accelerated, and then after a few minutes, it's confirmed. And so this is a great way to help you out if you are stuck. And this can happen where maybe your wallet doesn't have RBF or CPFP, or it might help you in situations where it's impractical to go and re-sign. So for example, multi-sig with keys in different locations. And thirdly, even in some lightning scenarios, perhaps a forced close, you might not be able to use RBF. And so in this case, the mempool accelerator can help you out. So keep it in mind, and you can find out more over at mempool.space/accelerator. And now back to the show. Yeah, and it's interesting you say, like, because at one level it's meant to be objective, it's meant to be a technical sort of aspect of, you know, what gets in and what doesn't. But it is interesting that there is this human element of it also, right? That you actually have to, you know, be skilled at interpersonal skills to get people to care about your project, so that you can actually move things forward.
And I think that's a good point for me to hook in and say something that I just recently, just when I thought about this championing stuff, also just like what that I realized is that I mean, some people have this conception that there are some people that have like certain powers or so in the developer community that have higher power than others, that they are the only ones that can get stuff done, and I think what people don't realize is that while some people are maybe more capable than others, and some people have been there longer than others, I think the people that get stuff done, they always put in a lot of work into this communication part as well. Producing writings, delving Bitcoin posts, mailing list posts, going on podcasts, giving talks. I don't think anyone who has ever gotten a big project done has not done any of these things, and I don't think anyone will ever get anything done without doing these things. Just I mean, when you see somebody getting something done, also pay attention to how they are communicating and what effort they put into the communication part as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing, that you have to be able to code and explain your ideas. I think it's people, like, we're hoping for this meritocracy, right? Like, the best ideas are the ones that move forward. And people are used to, in a company, like, somebody else who's really good at the talking is calling the shots and deciding what the engineers are going to be building. And that's, I don't enjoy that at all. In Bitcoin Core, I think some people struggle with the idea that, like, oh, like, my work should speak for itself, but there is nowhere on the planet where that is, like, you can just write crappy code with no comments and not explain any of it, and like lots of people will, you know, it is humans that comprise this meritocracy, right? And humans have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of attention, and so, like, doing just the basics of, like, explaining what your ideas are, like, nobody's asking you to, like, make this, you know, like, this crazy flowery, like, presentation. It's just like, you have to be able to explain your ideas to another human being who is going to review your work. So I wouldn't be turned off by the idea that interpersonal communication skills is a huge component of getting things done. I think it's more of an asset, like, it's more an advantage. It's a good thing that you have the full amount of power and authority to get other people onto your team, rather than, like, hoping that some person high up who actually has power is going to pay attention to your project and decide to command other people to do it with you. I think this is as close to a meritocracy, like an actual meritocracy, as I've ever seen. Obviously, you know, I'm not, you know, I haven't worked at, like, a million companies, but I think this is better than anything else.
Yeah, I see. And I think one perception, and maybe it's the wrong perception, to be clear, but it seems that there seems to be the perception of, you know, oh, if this idea was championed by, you know, pick your name, some super senior, well-known Bitcoin developer, then it would get through, and otherwise it's not going to get through. And that's the, you know, and so then people sort of start to say, oh, look, see, if this idea was proposed by that person, oh, it would have gone through. But because it wasn't, therefore, you know, it's not, you know, this person is not as popular or whatever, and now that's why this idea is languishing, right? That seems to be a perception. I'm not saying it's the right perception, but I'm sure you guys have seen that perception. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean that was kind of the point I was trying to make previously. I mean, of course, doing this communication work is not a guarantee that things will get merged, but as I said, it's a prerequisite to get something done. I think that is a bigger project, yeah, like I don't think there's any magic or a hidden cabal or so of people that have like prioritized access or so to get things done. I think nobody gets pushed to the side or so. And another point that I wanted to make that like ideally, of course, the person can communicate stuff well and can code, right? But even if you're not comfortable with like doing part of that work, that is an ideal scenario for when you then would have a team of somebody who does the implementation stuff and somebody who does the communication stuff. Like, I mean, the communicator probably would also need to do some coding, otherwise it's not so, but I mean, that's basically the same scenario as with AssumeUTXO, just that there was a timing difference, right? Like the main implementation was written by James, and then I later came in and did mostly like this communication and coordination and like doing like providing transparency basically with a tracking issue and so on. So. And for example, also with some other stuff that I'm working on, the cross-input signal aggregation stuff, for example, I will not be able to make it to TabConf this year, but they were interested in having a talk about it, and so then they do the stuff where they put out an issue, and people can kind of apply to do a talk, and so I basically said in there like I cannot be there, but I can help you if you want to make a talk on it. Like we can talk about it, and I've produced this website. You can use this website to give a talk, and we can talk about it. And then somebody who I've never met, who I don't know, said, okay, I'm interested in giving this talk. And so now we are. I mean, it's not 100% sure yet that it's going to happen, but there's now somebody else who basically will do championing for this project for me at TabConf, right? And so yeah, there's always other people can step up, and like the ideal scenario is where you kind of form a team of like, for example, I perceive Gloria and Greg now to be a great team where both of them are capable to go both on a podcast and code everything, but also like the roles can be different, right? And so yeah, that's always also that's the point that I really want to make, that there's openings for contributing as a champion, and it also doesn't have to be one person that is only the champion. You can always jump in, like also like on our weekly IRC meetings, just when we asked for like an update or so, and then the person that was championing could be there, and somebody else who's been just doing some stuff recently can give an update. So yeah, just also we shouldn't put like there's not we talk about one champion basically, or a person championing, but it also doesn't have to be just one person, and it's like not like this person cannot be touched or something like that.
Yeah, and sometimes like your relation to other projects can also come into play. Like I actually haven't talked much about this before, but my original idea was to gun for like BIP 331 package relay. And then I would start thinking about things like truck. At the time, it was just called V3. And then when cluster mempool came around, like that was the plan. I was like, oh, we'll just get package relay done, and then we'll do cluster mempool, and then we'll do truck. And then we actually figured out that truck is like a really good stepping stone for cluster mempool. And like we can hit two birds with one stone basically, and like basically refactor the project around all three, so that we do 1P, 1C package relay, truck, et cetera, and then cluster mempool, and then all of the package relay stuff. And I almost like completely reverse the order of the things that I wanted to work on, because like, I mean, it wasn't that we had competing projects, but like code-wise, they conflict with each other, right? But actually they work really well together. And like, there's a way to get these things done where they all actually build on top of each other and make it easier to get the other things merged. Like we got the fee rate histogram stuff of cluster mempool done in our package RBF project. And like, kind of teasing out this timeline and like, I don't know, rebraiding it, I guess, if that's a good visualization, was also a part of like this kind of working group thing. And like, I would consider Suhas and Peter like really close collaborators on the truck stuff. And I think I would maybe contrast this with some of what I feel like Covenant proposals are doing, where they almost look like they're competing with one another. And anecdotally, like I had a talk with someone who said like, oh, I haven't really read the other Covenant proposals yet. And I'm like, but you're trying to achieve the same thing. Like ideally, you can come together with one proposal. And I kind of attribute this again to maybe some of the grant application stuff, where like you got to have a brand name to put on your grant proposal, and you want to work on your own stuff that you authored, not somebody else's stuff. And again, I'm not like blaming anybody, but you can kind of naturally, you can understand why people naturally have this instinct of like, oh, on my grant application, I should have my thing, and it has a name and it has a BIP and it has like all these cool things, and it would be really cool if I got this done. But I think sometimes we compete when we should collaborate.
Okay. Well, look, I think that's about all we've got time for. But I guess any last messages you guys have, or maybe just any thoughts on what are some of the projects coming up that you think are coming in future versions?
Cluster mempool.
Yeah, ASMap is also kind of something where we still have the one thing to get done is to embed a default ASMap into the code, so it's even easier to use it. Like you don't need to get the map anywhere else at all. So yeah, that's a single pull request, but still, of course, this process of producing the map that I've put a lot of work and thought into, that is going to be still even more under focus once we get there, once this is considered to be merged. So yeah, that's something to look forward to potentially for the next release at least. I will. It is ready for that. If it will get merged, we don't know. But yeah, that's part of the work, and I'm very grateful that I have people contributing to ASMap and especially producing the maps now. That group has grown quite a bit. And there's somebody else who's going to join, Julian, who is going to work primarily on ASMap and is working on a website for it. And that's another tip that I can give. Like it sounds kind of stupid, but having a website can be quite powerful. If you can just give people just a URL that is easy to share, that they can, like, even if you just throw it at them at a conference, that they can remember, like that's really helpful, I think. And so it also just, even if it's just easier for you, like for example for cross-integral aggregation, I'm just now pointing people always to the website where I say like everything is linked there. Like if you want to learn it all, like it's all, like you should get everything all from there, and like that's kind of like what I believe to be the state of things. And yeah, and then also give people a good intro to contribute themselves.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, look, I think that's a great spot to finish up. Thanks, guys, for joining me. And yes, I'll put some links in the show notes for listeners who are interested to learn a bit more about these things. And yeah, thanks for joining me, guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Stephan.